Ed Collab Gathering. Elisa Waingort is an associate with the Educator Collaborative. She has been an educator for over 30 years with a wide range of experiences. Currently, she serves as a learning leader and fifth grade teacher in the Spanish bilingual program of the Calgary Board of Education in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Dana Onayemi is an associate with the Educator Collaborative. Currently, she is working towards completion of a doctoral degree in literacy from Judson University. This school year will be her 11th year teaching intermediate students in the suburb west of Chicago, Illinois. It is my pleasure to introduce Assessment as Learning, Reading and Writing Workshop Essentials, K-8.
Okay, hello everybody. This is Elisa. I'm going to start us off with this session. And first of all, the session is about assessment as learning, and we're looking at reading and writing workshop essentials, as we call them. What are the important things in terms of assessment? And I know that I can speak for both myself and Dana when I say that we're thrilled to be here, and that we hope that you can take some things away from this session at the end for both reading and writing ideas to take back to the classroom to help you with assessment for your students, with authentic assessment for your students. As a little housekeeping thing, our hashtag for this session is see it on the screen. It's the Ed Collab Gathering space hashtag 8. And we hope that you will tweet out anything that you get from this session, either questions or comments or pushbacks or other ideas, takeaways as we are going through this session. And to get started here, both Dana and I, when we were planning our session, we were talking about, we thought that we might be able to have a little bit of interactive time, but instead we're going to ask you as we're getting started to maybe think about what are some hot button assessment topics in reading and writing that, as you see on the screen, keep you up at night. What are some of those things that that you feel like are those issues that maybe we hope to address in this session? And if they don't come up, make sure that you go ahead and bring them up on the Twitter chat. Okay. So as we look at authentic assessment, we are looking at the screen that you're looking at right now kind of goes through what Dana and I have been discussing in terms of what are some of those premises that we hold about authentic assessment. And in our conversations, we talked a lot about accountability versus learning. Why do we do assessment? And I know that the discourse in schools, in public schools particularly, of which both Dana and I currently are working in, the issue is around accountability. How do we get the kids to show what they're learning so we can tell someone else, like their parents or their principals, what it is that they know and are able to do? And really, in our conversation, what we agreed about is that although we do need to report this out to the community at large, and that includes parents, we are remiss if we don't look at the fact that when we assess kids, what we really want is to find out about their learning and to use that understanding to help them learn something that they're ready to learn next. And that we are second, while I toggle back and forth, that we really want kids to show what they're doing and to reflect on their learning. This isn't about us as teachers. It's about students and teachers learning side by side and working together. Assessment is more of a collaborative endeavor in the classroom. It's I like to use a Alberta educator who sadly passed away about 3 years ago, Joe Bauer, who talked about assessment as conversation. So when we sit side by side with kids, we're talking to them and we're learning about them and we're gathering information. They need to do the same, and then together, collaborating together, we can decide on what the next steps are and what are the strategies that we can use to help students learn more. So that's kind of in a nutshell, when we talk about authentic assessment, kind of what we're talking about. So feedback is a key element of that. And it involves not just teachers giving feedback, but other students giving feedback, and the students themselves reflecting on their learning. And then we hope to address some of strategies and ideas that you can implement in your classroom right away. And we want you to have a kind of an excitement, a sense of excitement about your assessment journey as well. So, move on. So Dana is going to talk a little bit now about some more around assessment and what's our some metaphors that we can use to think about assessment.
Yeah, so I wanted to start off with thinking about a very concrete skill that everyone at least has some kind of idea what that looks like in action. But just think about riding a bike, for example. If you wanted to be able to tell if someone else was able to ride a bike or if you were able to ride a bike, what images would you be conjuring up in your mind? Because when I think about that skill of riding a bike specifically, I think about, something that looks a little bit like this. I hope that came up. So hopefully that is working here. So something like this, really riding a bike is about doing it. You need to be able to get on the bike, practice a little bit, fall down, get back on, and you get that support and that feedback from that coach who's standing right there, right beside you. And then at some point, they're ready to let go. But when I think about what that looks like and what this means for teaching a kid how to read or for teaching a kid how to write, sometimes we're not giving them those opportunities to learn how to read and write by reading authentically and by writing authentically, which is really, we want to really push that. What do we even mean when we say that word authentic? Because I'm going to try to get this to stop here for the screen sharing. Hold on a second. I'll go ahead and go on to here we go. A lot of times what you might see happening, if we were to think about the metaphor from a classroom perspective, you might see, when we're learning how to read or learning how to write, let's break it down into all its different parts. So when you think about that with a bike, you've got all of the different parts, different things that you certainly need to know, like for reading, the different are and all of those kinds of things, but that's not really necessarily how you read authentically. You're not sitting there like, today I'm going to really look at just the setting and I'm just gonna, read for the purposes of filling out this graphic organizer on setting. And when we're thinking about that from the metaphor, it's looking something like, this is the kind of assessment we're giving that you're taking away from that opportunity. And we want to think a little bit different about how do we support readers in action? How do we support writers in action instead of only breaking it down into its individual components and then assessing and even grading things in isolated pieces? So we're hoping that as we go throughout the session, you can kind of think about how can you bring it back to that metaphor of, are the skills and the strategies, are they about being in action, or are they separate, discrete, separate skills that are going on? So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Elisa to talk a little bit more about what this looks like in the writing workshop.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Okay, so before I would talk about the writing workshop a little bit, I wanted to go back and talk about, I'm going to ask Dana to go back and maybe talk about assessment of learning and assessment for learning. And then I'm going to, if that's okay, Dana? And then I'm going to do talk about, because in education we talk about assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and we're also going to talk about a little bit more about assessment as learning, and then we're going to get into some specifics for how we do this in the writing and reading workshop. So we're going to go through this a little bit fast, but I think it's important to kind of set the stage for that.
Yes, so I will go ahead and I'm going to go back to that, and I'm going to share just a summary of assessment of learning and assessment for learning. That's something that you might see. This is just an image from Ann Davies, and it kind of just summarizes the big ideas of the difference. I know in my district, we spent a lot of time breaking down the difference, you know, assessment of being more summative and assessment for being more formative. And, you know, making sure that we have balance and what is the purpose, and, you know, assessment of, that's more to look at, you know, are they getting things by a certain date or end of the unit, more systems wide evaluation or maybe grade level wide evaluation of how the students are doing. But that's not necessarily the assessment that's the most meaningful for the students. And then you get to the assessment for learning, which is getting a lot closer to the students, but really, you know, the thinking around that is really to help teachers decide what to do next and what the instruction should look like next for assessment for the formative pieces that you're getting, so that you can see, okay, all the students are really struggling on this one area. So this is assessment for learning. So I can use this to, you know, now I'm going to pull a small group based off of, I'm seeing this gap with these 5 or 6 students. Now, even better is where Elisa is going to talk about taking it one step further to include that assessment as learning piece.
Okay, so assessment as learning is really the big umbrella of where I think we want to be. That incorporates assessment of learning and it incorporates assessment for learning. But assessment as learning is that constant stance of assessment that we want to have in the classroom, so that it's not, and I go back to Joe Bauer's work, it's not about giving this test or that project or that writing prompt or that on-demand piece of a topic for the kids to write on. It's about constantly observing. It's a lot of kid watching, as Yetta Goodman talks about. It's a lot of sitting beside. It's collaborative, as I said earlier. So we want to incorporate, I'm going to share this window here. So we want to incorporate both formative and summative assessment, right? We want assessment for and assessment of learning. But we want to stress that everything that happens in the classroom may inform both students and teachers of student progress and as learners. So it's learner, and actually we talk about student-centered, but I like to use the term learner-centered because as a teacher, I'm also a learner in the classroom. So it's learner-centered. It's an assessment as an opportunity for both the teacher and the student to learn. And in Calgary here in the Board of Education, we use this success criteria. We also talk about rubrics. I'm not going to talk about rubrics today in my piece, but when we talk about success criteria, it's more of a checklist. I develop it with the kids. It's very collaborative. We talk about what of 4 or 5 items that we want to make sure that we focus on in whatever we're doing. that maybe 3 or 4 of those are important and the last one is optional, and then maybe leave some room for kids to say, hey, I want you to notice this that I've done in my work. And so it provides opportunity for self-reflection, peer and teacher feedback, and it allows for goal setting, which is one of the things that is important. I think in the classroom that the kids learn to set goals, and not just for us, but with us as teachers, help them create some goals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And so let me move on to the writing piece of talk about authentic assessment in the writing workshop. I just quickly gonna go through some pictures here of students. This is my students this year. They're working all over the room. They're just engaged, and some of them may be using their writer's notebooks, and some are writing on paper, some of them are drawing. And I want to stress the use of writer's notebooks in the writing workshop. It's taken me a long time to get there, actually, as a teacher, and even as a writer, a teacher who writes, and that to say that I'm a teacher who writes has been a process. But it's a place. I have the writer's notebook as a place to practice, to experiment, explore, to curate writing, and to be a joyful writer. And I credit Ralph Fletcher for this joyful piece of writing. I went to a session of his at NCT a couple of years ago, and I was having a horrible year in the writing workshop with my students, and he just brought in the light, and I felt validated in a lot of things that I was doing. So I want to stress too that if you don't have some kind of writing workshop set up, or the conditions that you see on the screen in your classroom, it would be very hard to have authentic assessment, because then it will be, okay, 5 minutes of free writing. And at the beginning of the year, I was telling Dana that it's very hard to move the kids from, oh, it's free writing time, to this idea of a writing workshop where there's a lesson and you get to practice whatever I've been teaching in the mini lesson. And then you get to do a lot of your own writing. You get to spend a lot of time working on your own writing projects, and then we share and we give each other feedback. So that's really key and very important in this whole process. As well as conferring. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but conferring for me, just to say that conferring is, for me, is the place where kids are, it's that sit beside piece, and it's where I get a lot of information about what the kids are doing, and where we can talk about their writing and then move it forward. And so now I want to get to some of the specifics in terms of a couple of strategies that I want to share. If I can only find, oh, there it is. Here we go. Okay, so one of the things I have my students do at the beginning of the year is talk about the kind of writer they are and the kind of writer that they want to be. And I have here some samples, and again, I'm not going to speak to all of them, but I will talk a little bit about a couple of them and what do they show me, right? So the one on the left, he wrote, I'm the kind of writer who does not do well under time. So if you put a timer, it will make, it'll be more difficult for me to write. And I do use a timer during the class at times. I want them to have some structured time to write. I, as a writer, do that myself. I set a timer for 10 minutes. Sometimes it goes over. It stops and it goes over and I keep writing, and sometimes I just stop. And I want to be the kind of writer who, when I have an idea, I can write it down immediately. So right away in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so this is a child who needs lots of space and lots of time to write, gets anxious, with with being timed. So I need to stress that this is just a beginning piece, not the whole piece. And in terms of a timed piece of timed timed moment to write, and that here are some, let's make some goals, or let's have some strategies for how you think of an idea, how are you going to get that down somewhere so that you can remember. In the other piece, I'm the kind of writer who tries, is that the right one? No, I think I'm going to go to the next screen. This one, the one on the left. I'm the kind of writer who tries to find ideas, like to have lots of writing, likes to write about animals, and likes working with friends. I want to be the kind of writer who has lots of ideas and has good spelling and illustrations and interesting and cool stories, also not too slow. So there's some things in there that I need to, like, are kind of, is information for me. What does not too slow mean? And why is that a concern? And is good spelling and illustrations, what are they trying to tell me there? Good spelling is something that we do at the end, or we can always get some help from. That's not the crux of writing. The other one, I'm the kind of writer who creates my characters first and then writes my story. I want to be the kind of writer who has a beginning, middle, and end before they start the story. So for this one, what I'm thinking, right, is, and I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. Okay, so for that one, I'm already, I can see he drew some illustrations. He likes to draw a lot, but he also wants help with knowing how to structure a story and organize it. So that's information that I'm definitely going to be focusing on, right? I'm going to skip those other two because of time. I don't want to take up all the time. I want to make sure Dana has her time to talk about reading workshop. So I asked students to look at what they did at the beginning. What I asked them to write about, I am the kind of writer, I want to be the kind of writer, was the first day of school, September 4th, and then just recently, it says October 25th, but it's September. But then I asked them to go back to what they wrote and to think of what could be a goal that they could work on. So although these three are not necessarily attached to some of the ones that I shared, they do relate, and I did help them. I coached them through it. They do relate to what they wrote. So I write one story by the end of October. So this is a kid maybe, who has trouble coming up with ideas, isn't sure, not always writing all the time, isn't, needs a lot of support. The one on the right, keep an idea book with me at all times, and write the words, find the words outside my window. But the first one is the idea book is great. And that's something that I can definitely have him share or her share with the rest of the class. I used to know, but now is another strategy that I use with the kids at the end of the school year. So here are some examples for that I wanted to share with you. And Dana, make sure that, give me a signal if I'm kind of going too much. Okay, so let's see. So here are some examples, and these are from my students last year. As a writer, I used to write long stories. This is the one on the right, and fantasy stories. And I also focused a lot on my writing, such as making my writing better and making my writing longer. But now I write long stories, but without a lot of fantasy. And now I write information about stuff too, such as animals and insects, plants, and more. Now I focus on making writing neater and still try making my writing clearer. Whoa, I want to clap for that one, right? Because often you'll see I want to make my printing really good, but yes, want to make it really clear and legible, but I'm also looking at the content of my writing. I want to make it clearer. Then, so as a writer, I used to always write long stories, but I never really used lots of descriptive words. And I also didn't really use commas and apostrophes. And now I use lots of descriptive words. I remember to use commas and apostrophes. I also write my stories very long, and I make sure my story makes sense. And sometimes I also, and she kept going. So all of that to me is in a snapshot, both of these. All of these examples in a snapshot, what my students are able to do, learn throughout the year, and I can show the parents, look, this is what they were saying at the beginning of the year. This is what they're saying now. These are some examples of the work that they can do. This is a collaboration that we did in the classroom. This was all a conversation, right, that we were involved in. I will now move it on to Dana. And, Dana's going to talk about reading workshop and the strategies that she uses there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was awesome. Some really great ways to look at the students self-evaluating and being able to set goals for themselves, which to me is a huge part of reading workshop as well. And just like for writing and thinking back to the keynote this morning about making sure that students have opportunities to see themselves. So in reading, to be able to have books where they can see themselves, and for writing, to be able to have that freedom to choose topics where they can see themselves and reflect on their experiences, and that we make room for that in both the reading and the writing workshop. And so for me, like the most important thing when I'm trying to assess readers to see where they're at and how they're doing and where they need my help is to look at what books they're actually putting into their hands. And I spend a lot of time doing book talks, talking about really great books that I think will push them as readers, and where all different kinds of readers can see themselves, but also just a way to encourage that book love so that it's a community of readers and not, just the teacher telling them what to read and how to read and then to go off and do it. So I was just going to share a little bit. You can look and see. So I like to always have books that I'm now currently featuring, and that's where the book talks are really crucial. Sometimes I'll read a little excerpt, but this is just to promote one thing that I look for when I'm assessing them as a reader, that they're reading variety. I want them to be reading poetry and informational texts and fantasy and realistic fiction and current events and all kinds of different types of texts in order for me to help, build them across all of the different skills that they are working on as readers. So they don't know, though, if I go to conference with a kid and I ask, have you read any poetry lately? They might not know where to go to get that. So I make sure every morning we have a morning meeting, and I either read an excerpt from a book or I share a quote that I think will frame the learning for the day. So I have there, just a bunch of different powerful quotes. I try as much as possible to bring in that love of reading and variety of text. So to do that, I wanted to just quickly share some with you that I kind of think build in the themes of the day, the themes of the conference from this morning. And one thing that I want to make sure is that I'm promoting books that I know kids are going to want to read, because that to me, if they have the right book in their hand, then I could sit down beside them and help them as a reader to grow on whatever skills that they're working on. So a lot of teachers will of graphic novels being an important part of your literature. But there's tons. There's so many good ones. This book, Child Soldier, When Boys and Girls Are Used in War. This is a really great one that you can have students access and read and jot and talk, have book club around, and the types of ways that you're going to get kids to really dig deep into their thinking is by putting those texts in front of them that really elicit that type of thinking. So there's all kinds of different picture books that you could use as well. One that I really like for getting kids to just think about the power of text is the breaking news and what that means for, you know, trying to deal with all of the different things that are going on in the world, and then connecting that to the reading choices that we're making each day. And so one thing that I'm looking to assess them on is if they're able to make those connections and pull across different texts and connect, you know, when they're reading, to jot about, you know, what they're thinking. So the other big part of reading workshop, I know there's an accountability piece, and in my school, we're really expected to have the kids fill out reading logs every single day for their in school and their home reading. So I'm going to show you right here. This is a little sample from the engagement inventory that I adapted from Jennifer Saravallo's The Literacy Teacher's Playbook. And I use that to kind of track, I use that to track where the students are at in, you know, their particular books, if they're picking up the same book every single day and continuing to read that book and make connections through their jots that they're doing. And then I compare that side by side, their reading log that they're filling out. And really, reading logs could sometimes hinder a kid's love of reading, or just the act of filling it out or getting in trouble if they don't fill it out or get it signed. You know, that could actually hinder your reading culture. But the way I help students view it is it does not have to hinder your culture, that I really help them see that the reading log, if they know that it has meaning and it has value, that they're going to be looking and they're going to be studying their own habits, and they're going to be looking for patterns. I tell them that I read their reading logs like a detective. I'm like a detective, and I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for clues about, you know, what they're really doing well as a reader. And I'm looking, are they moving forward through their books? Are they getting stuck? Are they abandoning books very often? Are they reading 3 or 4 different chapter books at one time? And then that's the assessment piece. That's the to have the discussion with them that will really help move them forward in the reading workshop in a way that it's not, you know, and they know, they're honest with me. If they don't get to read or they don't get their log signed, they say, you know, we had a really busy night last night and I didn't get to do my reading. And I really find that the kids are being true to themselves because of how we treat it in our culture, that it's something that's important to us because it's how we reflect on our reading and on our learning that we're doing. So to me, that's a really big part of assessing kids, is through their reading choices, through their reading habits. I also think it's really important to, you know, consider their interests. And so I have, you know, student reading inventories that they take at the beginning of the year, but it goes beyond just, you know, books that they like, but also, you know, their general feelings about reading in different places or for different purposes, and then specific things about their habits. Do they never do those things? Sometimes do those things? Always do those things? That really helps me get great assessment information to help move them forward. I also think that there are some really great other tools that kind of serve similar purpose as a reading log would. But Biblionasium it's kind of like, I think of it as Goodreads, but for kids, and way more, you know, kid friendly. But there is a log on there that if you have the freedom as a teacher to use different kinds of ways for them to keep track of their reading choices, for me, this is a really great tool because students can create, I'll show you here, they create their own bookshelves of books that they have finished so that they can reflect on their choices across, and then they can visually see those book covers. And there's just something so rewarding about looking at shelves filled with books that you've read to completion and seeing all the titles there, even better than when you just see it on the log. So I think that is an awesome tool for getting kids to to track the books that they're reading and the choices that they're making, but also then to share with the other students in the classroom books that they think that other kids might like. So that's another great feature of Biblionasium, as you can see on this side, is they can write book reviews, and then those reviews become an amazing formative assessment, because I can look to see how they try to capture the big ideas, and how, if they're able to then take that critique lens to the book about what would other kids like this book and why, or what other aspects that they might want to feature of that book. So for me, having another digital tool like that is powerful. And if I had my way, I would just use that, and I wouldn't have the paper log at all. But I kind of make the best of the situation and try to have it be used to really help promote those reading engagement and reading as a social activity, because that's where I get the best assessment information, is when two readers are sitting side by side talking about a book that they have read and using that to move them forward. Besides having really great books, really great books, some sort of way to keep track of what you're reading and how it's going for you, setting goals, having a notebook. The other biggest piece for me is having some way to jot either Post-its or a reader's notebook, whatever works best for your classroom. But I'm just going to show you a little bit here about kind of what I do with the jots. I've taken ideas from so many of the great leaders and teachers from the Educator Collaborative and elsewhere to really think about the power of the jot. So the jot is authentic. When they go to jot about their reading, I'm not saying everybody today has to make sure they jot about a memory moment in your text if you're using notice and note signposts, or everybody has to jot about the setting, the details of the setting today. I want them to see that readers, when they read, they jot about the things that are important to them, and they write down those really smart thoughts that they have in their head that they just don't want to forget. But then I have them collect like their last anywhere between like 4 to 10 jots at a time, depending on the reader and how much they can handle. And I have them read and critique and look and name their patterns. Like, oh, I tend to really jot a lot about my own feelings as a reader. Or I tend to jot a lot about like the character and the choices the characters are making. And you see like a lot of times, the readers who are struggling a little bit more, a lot of their jots are more about the plot elements and the things that are right there. And they'll jot about the events, and they'll maybe make some predictions that might happen that are more right there, and you see the progression. And so then I even try to show them a progression, kind of pulling in the idea of micro progressions that Kate and Maggie Roberts talk about. But I really think that just having them have authentic ways to read and name their thinking is powerful. And then the ability to reflect on that, combining it with their reading logs and all of the different things. Here is an electronic version when I was having them do their reflections on OneNote in OneNote notebooks. They would look at how they were doing on different specific skills and strategies that we were working on, and then writing and setting goals. I've had them do this in OneNote. I've had them do this directly right in their reader's notebook. I've tried a lot of different ways and different tech tools, but really it's the importance of having a way to reflect and then set goals as a reader. So with that, and here's more examples. Don't really have much time to go through all of them, but just other ways. I really think that it's important for students to be able to find important excerpts that spoke to them, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. And Actively Learn is another really great tool that it's free for educators, and I've always found that the support is really amazing, and it's a great way for them to jot almost like you would on a Post-it, but right there in the digital tool, and they can share with the other students in the classroom. And it's actually just a really great way to make their thinking visible, because that's how you can really see where they're at as a reader, to push them forward and to give them that explicit one-on-one or small group instruction based off of what you're noticing in their JOTs and in your one-on-one conferences, and maybe even, you know, using some of these tech tools as other ways to gather critical assessment information. So that to me is like the heart. You can add in a lot. I mean, there's so much more you could add, but the heart of Reading Workshop, I think, is great books, somehow, some way to jot and to annotate what you're thinking, and then having a community to share that with peers and with the teacher in ways that makes everyone excited. So
I just wanted to add one last thing before, I know our time is running down, but I think as a wrap up, that the important thing about, if I had to use that, the important thing from the important book, the important thing about authentic assessment is being flexible, having a collaborative spirit, and using it as a conversation with students, with parents, with administrators about what kids are able to do, what they know, and to help our students learn better and learn more. I think, and knowing that every year you have a different group of students and you may need to adjust things, right? So as maybe for you later, as you're watching and as we're wrapping up, if you, as kind of a self-reflection for you, or maybe to tweet it out, like, what, I'm the kind of teacher and I want to be the kind of teacher who. So just something for that we thought maybe you could think about as we finish up this session. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope that you're able to get some ideas that you can take back to your classrooms.
yes, thank you so much. I really, you know, this is a first time experience, and there's a little learning curve that comes with it, but I hope that everyone was able to take at least something, at least one piece back to reflect a little bit deeper on. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Elisa. We hope everyone will join us for session 4 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks.